professor of political science and William Weber Chair of Social Science at Kalamazoo College. She has authored 4 books, including the most recent one, The European Union, Anti-Semitism, and the Politics of Denial, and she's received numerous awards for her scholarship, Fulbright fellowships, and NEH grant. Together with her scholarship, she's also worked personally on behalf of women's rights against anti-Semitism in the United States and Europe for over 3 decades. Professor Kenneth Waltzer is Professor Emeritus of History at James Madison College. He was the Director of the Jewish Studies program at MSU from 2004 to 2014. He was also the Associate Dean, the Interim Dean of James Madison College, and he directed the Center for Integrated Studies in the Arts and Humanities. Professor Waltzer's research is in American social and political history and modern Jewish history in Europe, America, and Israel. His research into the Holocaust is recognized internationally, especially for his work on the rescue of children at Buchenwald. Currently, Professor Waltzer is the Executive Director of the Academic Engagement Network, which is a national faculty organization dedicated to countering the BDS movement. And he's going to talk about when anti-Zionism becomes anti-Semitism, lessons for American college campuses. And the third speaker is Professor Yore Kedem. Professor Kedem is Assistant Professor of Hebrew in the Department of Linguistics at MSU. He directs the Hebrew program. He received his doctorate in education, in secondary and continuing education from the University of Illinois. And his research focuses on experiential and aesthetic education. He's also an amazing educator himself. He teaches all levels of Hebrew. He teaches on immigration. He directs the study abroad program in Israel in 2016, last year in 2018, and I think we're doing it again next year in 2019. And he's going to talk about boundaries of Israel criticism, understanding Yeshayahu Liebowitz.
I'm so honored to be here this afternoon in this Serling sponsored space, and I thank you, Elle, for organizing this vibrant conference on Israel at 70. In this presentation, I want to do 3 things. I want to first address where the term pinkwashing came from. I want to consider BDS's appropriation of that term and explore, not least, how pinkwashing accusations impinge not just on Israel's reputation, but on the very existence of democracy more broadly. So let me begin by telling you that the term pinkwashing was initially used by American breast cancer survivors in 2001 in their efforts to condemn the corporate profiteering that resulted from campaigns to increase sales of pink-colored commodities while ostensibly raising public awareness and charitable funding for women with cancer. A decade later, in 2011, BDS appropriated that term to insist that Israel's promotion of rights for lesbians, gays, bisexuals, and trans folk, otherwise known as LGBT people, they argued that Israel's promotion of those rights served as a smokescreen to conceal, that is to say, pinkwash crimes against Palestinians, an appropriation, I would argue, that marks just one of many that I'll be covering today. But before telling you about how a former AIDS activist and BDS warrior popularized the term pinkwashing, so now it refers to Israel specifically and to its gay-friendly positions, I'd like to cover just a little bit of queer history. Years before corporate executives bolstered sales through gender-conforming promotionals to women, American gay men openly embraced the color pink to signify their gendered defiance, a move most clearly, and I would argue unfortunately expressed, in their adoption of the pink Nazi triangle used to denote and facilitate the destruction of those men that Nazis identified as homosexual. That this exclusively male symbol came to signify LGBT rights is disturbing. And regardless of whether or not the symbol was adopted through historical ignorance or choice, the expectation that a Nazi symbol might be reclaimed as some sort of marker of liberation signifies a second appropriation, Again, the first one I noted was BDS's appropriation of the term pinkwashing for its own campaigns, and the second one I just mentioned was the gay male movement's Orwellian appropriation of a Nazi symbol to promote its visibility. By 1987, that Nazi symbol gained further prominence when ACT UP, the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, used it for its logo. Founded by Larry Kramer, ACT UP's mission involved combating the public's indifference to what he referred to as the AIDS Holocaust. His book, entitled Reports from the Holocaust, The Making of an AIDS Activist, with its pink triangled cover, analogized the public's apathy and the government's inaction towards HIV with the willful destruction of Europe's Jewry. Such strained analogizing marks the third appropriation, and it's in keeping with the first two. Bits of identity theft, first from women, also from Jews. As the HIV death toll mounted across the globe, the Nazi triangle and ACT UP's rhetoric equating the epidemic with Jewish genocide has since become ubiquitous. Tony Kushner popularized this in his play, A Bright Room Called Day, which trivialized the Third Reich by equating it with the so-called national senility of the Reagan era. Despite occasional rebukes, neither Kramer nor Kushner or their cohort have wavered from their position that the United States government's callous indifference and later incrementalism regarding gay men with HIV was tantamount to genocide. I go through this brief history because I'd like to tell you that I want to suggest now that 3 decades later, that efforts to boycott Israel have very much benefited from a generation of young activists so steeped in identity theft, Orwellian symbolism, and rhetorical appropriations of strained Holocaust analogies that they seem blissfully unaware of the ways in which their chants, such as "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," mimic, actually, the eliminationist ambitions of European fascists of the last century. Whether through historical ignorance or choice, this conceit stems from the others that I've just mentioned: identity theft, Orwellian antics, and historical amnesia. But now on to BDS and its appropriation of pinkwashing. Unsurprisingly, perhaps, the connections between ACT UP's agitprop and BDS right now were forged in part by a woman named Sarah Schulman, one of ACT UP's original and very few lesbian members. In her 2011 New York Times op-ed entitled "Israel and Pinkwashing," she writes the following: "After generations of sacrifice and organization, gay people in parts of the world have won protection from discrimination and relationship recognition. But these changes have given rise to a nefarious phenomenon: the co-opting of white gay people by anti-immigrant and anti-Muslim political forces in Western Europe and Israel," end of quote. Now, how hardworking LGBT activists pursuing recognition and rights are part of a plot to undermine Muslims and immigrants remains, to my mind, unclear, particularly when one recognizes that not all Muslims and all immigrants are heterosexual. Yet in one fell swoop, Schulman's anti-racist pretense enabled her to first invisibilize Western Europe's and Israel's racial and ethnic minorities, and secondly, reduce the hard-fought gains of, quote, gay white people to little more than a public relations exercise that somehow, and this is the third point, then